have a really great painting that I'm excited to share with you this week. I went out and I caught this little plein air scene in front of me. It was just such a lovely day. The weather was perfect. Everything was brilliant, beautiful green. And so I was down by this little waterfall and I captured this plein air study while out there. Now, there was a charming little family way in the background and I was just thrilled to add them to the scenes. So they are there. They're very small. And they actually got a hold of me and wanted me to paint it larger. So that's what I'm working on here. So it's a great way you can take your plein air study and turn it back into something a little larger in the studio. So I will demonstrate how I got out there and did this little plein air study. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My channel primarily focuses on plein air painting. I focus on painting in a manner that teaches you the basics of plein air painting with efficiency, composition, and basically getting out and having a good time. Enjoy my videos and let's get out there and paint something beautiful. There is nothing like the New England fall colors. People travel from all over the world to capture the gorgeous fall colors of New England. I would love to see you there. It's going to be a crash course on capturing gorgeous oranges and reds and golds and all of those fun things we love about fall. So I will see you then. If you would like some more information, shoot me an email and I'll be glad to get some out to you. Okay, so this is the scene and the finished painting that I ended up with. So in this lesson, I want to demonstrate, well, there's a lot of mixing greens here to deal with. And so I wanted to show you a little bit more too about painting water, and there's reflections and so forth. And then adding a little tiny family in the painting. So I began with a toned canvas. And I had toned this canvas with burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, a little bit of yellow ochre, and then I'm loosely sketching in from my thumbnail sketch, which I did off camera, just the overall composition and design. I'm just taking a thinned mixture of burnt sienna and some ultramarine blue, and again, just with a smaller brush, just sketching in from my sketch where the overall composition is going to lay on the canvas, keeping things very loose and not terribly committed at this point, just jotting down the overall placement. I'm also bearing in mind where I want my darkest passages to point toward the little family, and because you can see too off to the left that there is a nice dark wedge under the trees that is very helpful to sort of align our focus right to the little family. Now I'm taking a little bit of ultramarine blue and some cadmium yellow into that dark mixture that I have, and I'm blocking in some of that darker areas of the shadowed passage over there. Now, one thing about beginning painting on a canvas that's already toned, you're able to better determine the value of your subjects that you're laying down. When you start with just a stark white canvas, it's a bit more of a challenge. You can feel like on your palette you're getting a color mixed up accurately, and then as you lay it on your white canvas, you can second guess yourself and your judgments, and all of a sudden it doesn't feel right. So you keep going back to the palette to adjust, when on your palette it looks right. so you stop mixing, you put it on your canvas, and then it doesn't look right. So my point is, I like to begin on a toned canvas, especially in a value range that matches my palette below. You can see this, the color of my canvas very similarly matches the value of this palette here and the color of the wood on the other side of the palette box. That's just a nice gauge to help with assessing those, how light your canvas should be. Now I've added some blue and white to my green mixture as I'm working my way back. Even though my painting isn't detailed drawn in, the big bulk of the shapes are in. And so I wanted a very cool atmospheric passage further back to indicate that that wall of forest just bends around the water and goes away. So white will cool down any color. Now I'm using a little bit more of the white for the sky, and I will come back through later and clean up the sky holes and so forth. But at this point, this is just blocking in a value for me. You always want to work from large, vast areas to more specific. So if you can kind of think about it in terms of a sculpture, you wouldn't take a lump of clay and start sculpting in the eyes and eyelashes. That's how it is with painting too. You can't just start out with your canvas and start putting in details. You have to work from general to specific. So block in your design, block in your mass amounts of color values, and then you can always refine over the top of that. So what I just did there with the sky in the water is to help establish the different values, and also in establishing those values, I'm creating the depth and the composition, drawing the viewer right to the back where I want them to go. You can see how sometimes the paint gets sort of stiff on my palette, and those might be times and situations where I'd add just the smallest touch of Galkid gel or linseed oil just to loosen it up a little bit. Sometimes it's hard, I think, for especially beginners to not know when they need a medium, and so those are just instances and times when I feel a little bit would help to stretch it and smooth it out just a little. So I'm noticing here, before I move on, that there was a bit of a lighter passage in that water, and so that's why I was adding that sky as it went down toward the horizon. In the background, it created a reflection in the lower part of the water. Now this is a bit more of the gray, and I wanted to establish some of that gray that I was seeing across the water. Now obviously the picture off to the left is a photo of the scene, and throughout the day while I was, 2 hours while I was painting this, the light had changed a little here and there. So occasionally as you're painting, you want to make judgments and assessments based on your initial reaction. And so you have to sometimes work from memory because a cloud will pass over the sun and things like that. And there are times you'll see from what I'm painting to the picture on the left, it's a little bit different because the light, even from this picture on the left, had changed a bit during the course of painting this. So cad yellow, some white, and a little bit of phthalo green gives me a nice bright springy green where the light's hitting it. And I just want color notes right now. I'm just blocking in some of these passages where I know that there's gonna be sunlight hitting this and sunlight hitting over there. More ultramarine blue will deepen it a bit. Burnt sienna and ultramarine blue gives you a nice dark, and I wanted that really elusive, mysterious quality of the forest floor kind of slipping out into the out of the shadows. You could see it better in different passages throughout the day as I was painting than what is shown on the left in this photo reference, but you get the idea. The light sort of trickled slowly up the hill, and I thought that was fascinating. And I do apologize for the glare on this canvas. It's almost impossible on some occasions to get perfect filming conditions every time we're out and about. And it was just off, it was often overcast. I did have my umbrella shielding the canvas, but regardless, it was still picking up some sort of glare. And that is the foliage at the base of the distant trees. Yellow ochre, ultramarine blue. And you can see I'm mixing colors on top of old colors because I know that whatever it is I have to mix, I can use what's already on my palette as a base, and then I'll add into that this or that. It's like I just scooped some of that yellow and yellow ochre, or white and yellow ochre into that and mixed it up like that. Those two colors I knew were going to harmonize to work on getting that color for the water. It's almost like an army green olive shade. So without cleaning my brush in between passages, as the light moves across the water and the depth of the water changes as I'm seeing it, I just go right into another color and allow those colors to sort of mix on my brush. A lot more yellow ochre and burnt sienna, some of the cad yellow right up front where the rocks are. And I block in the area where I'm going to put the rocks and just let that, it's almost the sediment color of the base sand under the water. A bit more yellow ochre into that water, or cad yellow into that water. Gives it just a hint more of the green. And possibly it's a reflection, but river water especially does have a lot of that green yellow ochre, depending on the time of year too. If you get a lot of rain, a lot of the silt and soil washes into the river water and will make it more like milky because of all of the soil. So it's really going to be contingent on what has happened. Now I really liked how the light was changing as it moved across that reflection. It's essentially the sky that was up closer to me that had more of a grayish violet in the reflection. So I wanted to capture that before the painting and the lighting changed too much. I thought that was really interesting. So that's what you have to do sometimes when you see a part that really excites you. Just a light or a color, just grab it real quick, and you don't have to perfect it, but just know that you've got it in place and you can always come back to it. That's my alizarin permanent and ultramarine blue into that grayish mixture, that little purple gray. A little bit of phthalo green, ultramarine blue, and some cad yellow. I'm working on some of these beautiful greens. I'll take a little bit of yellow ochre, and I just grabbed some Galkid gel to kind of open up some of that paint, make it a little more fluid. Yellow ochre. That's the reflection in the water of some of the trees above. Now I know when I paint the trees above that they are going to be more vibrant. So I've added a bit more yellow ochre and burnt sienna into that mixture just to tone it down a little, because it is in the water and it's going to be more muted than what it is reflecting. So everything in the water is a little darker. And I chose to grab a bit of that purple to tone down some of the green that was getting a little too vibrant. See, as that, if you look in the reflection off to the left of the trees and the water, as they approach me, they get darker just because of the proximity of as the viewer to the reflection. So as I was painting that, it was important that I got those, as they gradually got closer to me, a little bit darker, except for up above where the sun is hitting the bright spots of the green. It was a little bit odd to be painting the highlights on the reflection of the trees before I even had them up above, but I did want to block them in while I had them on the surface of the water. I know that those things are going to change quite a bit throughout the course of an hour and a half to 2 hours. Cooler blue. You can see I have a lot of different piles of different greens that I have worked on and set up below that I can adjust and tweak as needed. And this is a bristle brush. I like these because I'm able to, as you saw, I scooped up the paint backwards to scrape sort of on the surface of the palette. That is a bit more of a challenge to do with a synthetic bristle because they're softer. The regular hog's hair bristle is a nice stiff brush that is a little bit easier for scooping and just grabbing a bunch of paint and working it onto the canvas. So I'm cognizant now of the ripples in the water, and I want to use brush strokes that reflect that shimmer in the context of the horizontal little dabs. Getting some nice darks in there. A little bit of white into that yellow ochre mixture. Now you might see some new colors on my palette here for this video. I do have a Naples yellow over there by the white. It's almost like butter. And I have been adding that onto my palette every now and then. It's not necessary. You can get a lot of other colors without it. So don't feel like you have to go out and buy a tube of that. But it is a useful color every now and then when I'm painting water. Now, while I was painting this, it's different than how the picture on the left it looks. There was a bit more gray, like a darker gray, under the shadow of the tree that was hanging over the water. And so I just got a bit of that. You don't see the tree hanging over the water on my painting yet. I haven't blocked that in. That is one of those things that as you're mentally building your painting and you're thinking about the layers, those elements that are almost a detail, where just the leaves hanging over, that's something that you can add it toward the end. White into that mixture. To get some of the rocks in the background, I want to start blocking those in. Yellow ochre. I felt that the color I had for the rocks was just too concrete gray. So adding a bit more of the yellow ochre gave it just a touch more of a realistic kind of earth. There's the Naples yellow, sort of a real granite. Define the form of what it is you're painting. So in this case, as I'm painting these flat rocks, I'm thinking about my brushstrokes showing and explaining the form. You have a few tools in your arsenal of painting that you can use to help arrive at certain effects and techniques. And your brush stroke is a strong one in that arsenal of equipment and tools to help you get that effect. So just be cognizant of the direction and the angle that your stroke is explaining. There are brushstrokes that are expressive and vibrant and alive, and there are brushstrokes that make you feel tired. They're uninspired, they're tired, they're overworked, they're unsure, tentative. Be the latter, be the former, be the brushstrokes, make the brushstrokes that show confidence, even if you have to wipe it out 3 or 4 times, 5, 6, whatever. Just if you put it down and it looks good, leave it alone. If not, you can wipe it off or paint over it, but keep trying. It's kind of, if you think about it as an ice skater that lands the triple axel, whatever, that's what I think of when I think of landing a good brushstroke. But the key is, if you think about them as words, how few words can you use to describe something? And that's what your brushstroke is like. You choose succinct words to find just the right thing to say. Now, further back, as the light would shift and the surface of the water had its varying changes, I did notice that as the sun would come out and shine on the water, I saw a lot of burnt sienna and ochre in the water, and I really wanted to grab that because it gave the whole scene a bit of warmth and redness, which it desperately needed. So it was a lovely variety to add to the painting. So I was excited to see that. Now I'm taking some darker ultramarine blue burnt sienna and I'm working it into the places where I see the strongest accents into the painting. The interesting thing about these tree trunks is that as there's lighter foliage around them, they're darker. And then where the forest becomes quite dark and shadowy, the trunks become light, and then you can see them. So just beware of that movement of light down a trunk. Now I'm beginning to map out where the rocks are under the surface of the water and along the edge of the water. These are some of my accents in the painting, and so they're important that I sort of chart where they're going to be. They're not necessarily accurate to nature. I'm using nature as a reference, but I'm not married to it. I don't have to get them exactly in the same spot, but I want them to play nicely and work together in harmony on my painting. So that is more blue than sienna as I block in those shadows. I'm using the tip of my brush just to soften some of those dark lines under the water, because if those edges of those shadows under the water are very sharp, they're not going to have the illusion of being under the surface. So I was just softening some of those. Now this was a little bit lighter. I added some white to this sort of sand mixture, and that is suggesting some of the rocks and the surface under the water up closer to me. You can almost see behind my easel what I'm working on there. As these rock accents go further back, I want them to be just a little bit lighter in value. As they stair step away from me, you lighten the value ever so slightly, and that gives it the illusion of space and distance. In a photograph, all of the darks look equally as dark, but in nature, you can kind of observe that they do stair step back a little bit lighter as they recede. One of the reasons that you don't want to get too hooked up on working from photos, because it can distort your perception of values. Now this is the color that is on the tops of the rocks under the water, and that's why I was jumping from pile to pile, because I wanted some that were a little bit lighter, white and yellow ochre, some that were a little darker, and some that had a bit more burnt sienna. So I had the 3 piles there that I was going to work from to get some of the different varying shades of sediment on the underwater rocks. Some of the rocks have been in the water longer and some not as long. So the color that they are under the water are going to be just slightly different. I'm coming back through with a little bit of the lighter value, the yellow ochre, the white, and I'm giving some of the rocks one more value of definition, whether it's an angle or a curve or whatever. But I just felt like some of them, because they were so close, deserve to have just a bit more contouring under the water. Now, as rocks break beyond the surface of the water, they don't have all the sediments that have built up on the rocks over time underwater. They are drier and grayer, and so I add more white and the blue and sort of a little bit more sienna to create sort of a gray for the dry above ground rock. This brush that I'm using is a filbert. It's a size, I think it's a 3. I have used it so much that it's ground to a point, and that doesn't make me happy. I don't love this brush, but it was helpful actually in getting some of these rocks in place. But I do like a flat edged brush for doing rocks. This is some of that bright spring green now, which is the cad yellow, phthalo green, just a tiny bit of phthalo green, and a bit of white, just a tiny bit of white. One thing I really enjoyed about that tree on the far left that had that bright chartreuse green is that it had that wonderful movement of light as it slipped back into shadow and got cooler, deeper green slipping back into the shadow. So I work on that a little bit. But I wanted to create some of the movement of and lay of these foliage patches, whatever pads, as they float back into the distance. As a tree curves and approaches the sky, it gets cooler. Even if you see more sunlight or fall colors or whatever at the top of the tree, you have to decidedly paint them a little bit cooler toward the top because there's more atmosphere and more sky. If you can look on the left where the trees at the top meet the sky, they do look cooler, a little bit whiter, a bit more atmospheric. And that does a lovely thing to create that illusion of curvature of the tree and distance and atmosphere. See how I added more white to that spring green mixture, and that arrived at that effect of making that appear more distant. As it slips down the tree, it gets a little darker, so I add more green and maybe some yellow ochre to deepen it. A little bit of phthalo green into that ultramarine blue mixture. This is for a cooler shadow color for as the trees slip into the back. But the white and the blue and the phthalo green work together to sort of cool it down. And there is glare on that. I didn't paint it that white, but that's a glary little patch. Cad yellow and blue give you a nice, just standard green. I'm letting some of those brush strokes blend into the sky, just rough enough to leave some sky holes through my flipping of the brush. Because again, I want that edge where the trees meet the sky to be soft and fuzzy. I'm not worried about losing those tree trunks I can repaint those very easily, and where they are located is not that challenging to try to remember. But I'm just, as you can see, I'm building up the textural layers in the background, keeping my brush strokes sort of choppy to explain the foliage a bit. I'm letting some of the shadow colors mix with the atmospheric blue that I put in the background. As I'm starting to build up the foliage of this passage of trees in the front, I feel I can do so now because I've worked on developing the background a bit further. So now I'm going to start thinking about the layers. I really liked the variety of the shoreline across the water, how the rocks and the water just had an interest in the different contouring. So I was trying to arrive at some of that interesting formation as I was working on the shoreline there, with the rocks and the shadows and the colors. Now again, where the sun is hitting these patches of light on the grass, you don't see in the picture to the left, but as the sun would come out, I'd grab those bright patches. Always asking myself, if I put this in, is it going to help tell my story? Is it going to help with the composition? Or is it going to detract? And so I felt that it helps to point the viewer back to the little people in the on that far rock that I will add later. And so that, I felt that was helpful in getting the bright green. And this too, you don't really see from the photo. There's a reflection of the green from the grass and the rocks just in the water down below. So I'm putting in a little bit of the reflections. You can kind of see it in the picture on the left, but the light, as it would ripple on the surface of the water, came through, and I just thought it was really interesting. It wasn't there the whole time, but when it was, and it coincided with the sunlight, I wanted to make sure to grab that. And again, is it going to help or hurt my composition? And I felt that it did help in drawing the eye back. So coming back through now and just softening up some of the edges of those trees. All right, now I'm working on some of the rocks, getting some of that warm gray, some burnt sienna and yellow ochre. So now I'm putting in some of the reflection of the rocks into the water. And I'm just grabbing a gray that might be a little bit darker than what it is being reflected. And I'm having sort of the same shape, just echo whatever's in the water. You can sort of see off to the left some of those reflections of the rocks in the water. So I'm adding some different values to the rocks here in the foreground, some of the darker shadows and some of the middle tone shadows. And when I'm done, I'll add some highlights. But for now, I'm just building up the dark and the medium values of these rocks. Always keeping my brush in short angular strokes. And I vary the shades of gray with a little sienna, a yellow ochre, a little more blue here and there, just because there's so many different colors of rocks, especially along a shoreline. Now those off in the distance, they do slip into shadow more, so I have more of the cooler blue shadows in the background there. A little bit of gray for that tree trunk. Just a few more tree trunks in here just to clean up that passage. And I'll push the darks a little bit darker because they've gotten a little bit mushy, I think, throughout the course of blocking in colors in this area. And I'm taking a little bit of the white with the yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, little cad yellow into that green. And I'm putting down some of these lighter tones on the some of the trees and bushes in the foreground. You can almost see it on the left-hand side. There were some trees just sort of peeking into the image, and I liked that effect a bit because it sort of lessened the intensity of the dark value of the trees. And I will add some more of the darks, and they are darker than what they show up here in the painting because of the glare, but I do punch those just a bit darker before I'm done. And I apologize for the occasional fuzziness. We try to edit that out as much as possible. That is when I got in between the camera and the painting. So I do apologize for that, and we do try to edit that out as much as possible. Now this is the reflection of the grass above the rocks that I'm putting in the water now. And I liked this because, again, it was helpful for the purpose of drawing the viewer to the back of the painting. And I'm establishing some more of the values around the rocks and the shoreline that I liked so well. And some of these trees, I'm putting in their reflections down in the water now. I know it's hard to see because of the glare, but we'll show a picture at the end of what I'm doing here. All right, so I'm taking some of that spring green. It's not quite as vibrant as what is up in the trees, but I'm defining again the passage in the water where the reflection is indicating those bright greens. But I don't want them to be too much of an object to observed, so I'm trying to put them in there, but I want to keep them softer and let the focus be up above and then back toward the family. Cooler green as we get closer to us, and in the shadows of the trees in the water it just seems like a cooler deep blue-green. So again, I'm just putting in a little more of the reflection in the water, and then as those reflections go further back, I want them to get cooler to mimic what they're being reflected in that cooler passage of those trees as the river bends around the forest bends around the river. Now I'm starting to add some of the foliage around the rocks in the foreground here by me, and I'm just taking some of that bright green and just sort of putting it in place. I'm trying not to allow the too much for contrast down in this corner, so I'm careful not to put it where it's going to draw too much attention. So it's sort of with the medium value tones in the rocks. So it's there, but it's not too prominent. I'm adding some of the shimmer on the water as it works itself around the rocks and some of the water in there. Yellow ochre, burnt sienna, some of the white. I'm taking some white, some ultramarine blue, a little bit of yellow ochre. I want to clean up and refine the sky holes and the reflection in the water. So I'm just taking my brush and I'm more or less carving out the shapes that I see for the sky to peek through the trees, and then I'll build around that a bit more. Using the corner of my brush, I can get some smaller dots. You can always get a smaller brush to make some of those sky holes. So I'm putting, while I have that color on my brush, just putting it in the water to clean up some of the shape of the reflection. I'm trying to bear in mind that what is being reflected is the sky as well as the trees. So the trees in the water are where they cast a shadow. In that shadow, you can see the rocks. So with the white, I'm going to, around the edges where the reflection of the trees are peeking into the white in the water of the sky, I'm using, again, the little bit of sky holes in there to indicate foliage. And it also, you can see the rocks under the water, so it's pretty interesting to paint the reflection as well as the rocks under the water. There's a bit of purple, ultramarine blue, and alizarin. I wanted to pull that purple out just a little more than as I had it in the beginning. When you find something like that you like, it's okay, I think, to push it just a little further, because it's a feature in a landscape that has a really nice effect in what you're doing, and this painting could use a little purple. So I was happy to add some in the water, especially to create that effect of movement of light. Now as I move over toward the passage where it gets even lighter, I'm adding more white and a little blue to that to further enhance that movement of light. Tiny bit of yellow into that white mixture will give it a bit more sunlight. As I worked on this painting toward the end, it was getting overcast and actually looking like it was going to threaten rain, which it never did rain, but I think that is where I was getting that sort of purple-violet movement of light in that shadow, or that reflection in the water surface. So I thought that was interesting to add a bit of a stormy sky reference. Now this mixture that I'm working on, the yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, with the predominance of yellow ochre, that is the foliage of the trees being reflected on the surface of the water as it overlaps the sky in the water. So I took the white sky holes and painted it into the ochre part, and now I'm taking the ochre part and painting it into the sky down below. So now I'm going through and I'm just taking smaller bites out of the painting just to see passages that need a little more finesse, a little bit of tweaking here and there, some darker green. I'm taking some ultramarine blue and some cad yellow. There's a little bit of the yellow ochre underneath. And I'm going to work on this tree that's in the foreground. And I, with everything else pretty much accomplished, that's sort of the final thing to add. So a nice dark green will overlap that cool blue in the background to really push it further back and give that illusion of distance by putting something strong, dark, and contrasting in the foreground. Now, I don't want to lose everything I did underneath it, so I want to be careful to not completely cover all of that up. Even though these leaves are sunlit or back sunlit, I don't want the intensity to hit this that I have hitting those trees behind it, because the sun was off to the right, up above right. So it was, as it was shining, it was hitting those trees with full force when the sun did come out. Some cooler leaves in the background, and those distant bushes and foliage. Now I'm coming through and adding some darker shadows in this foliage just to kind of push some of them back a bit. And this is the reflection of that tree down in the water. Now, to paint people in a scene, I like to paint them as dark little silhouetted carrots first. I do a little carrot with a little tiny head, and then you can just pick up spots of color for clothes. I did pink, a little bit of maybe a white t-shirt, and you can see off to the side here, it's sort of what I ended up with. You can tell that there's people. What I would like to do is do this painting larger and give them a little bit more detail and more information. And clearly I was leaning into the canvas, and so it was a little bit fuzzy, so I do apologize for that. And we will show the picture again of them off to the side. I'm coming through and I'm giving them a little bit more shadow and just some information, cleaning up the rock around them, giving them a place to, like, where they're standing. Just now I'm putting a fishing pole in the palette knife. Okay, now I'm coming through and I'm giving just some ripples in the water and some of the sand or the rock information. All right, you guys, well, that wraps this video up. I hope you enjoyed it, and this is the finished painting. I am going to make this into a bigger painting, and I'll share that with you at some point in the future. All right, everyone, well, that wraps up this video, and I hope you enjoyed this plein air of painting this little creek, and I enjoyed painting it with you, and hope you got a lot out of it. I'll see you in the next one.